Chairman, this is a board matter with you and Vice Chair Smith, and frankly, a whole bunch of other folks probably would have signed on to this if I would have gotten my act together earlier. But as the board is aware, staff presented a proposal to initiate the state-mandated 5-year process to determine whether Fairfax County should implement a Unified Sanitation District, or USD, for our single-family residential customers. Since that time, there have been a lot of questions and concerns raised in the community, much of which has been based on inaccurate or incomplete information. While the purpose of considering a USD is both to provide our single-family residents with better and more efficient service and to achieve county environmental goals, there may be options within a modified USD approach or within non-USD options that could achieve similar goals. After talking with many of you one-on-one, no meetings out of turn, and many residents, we have concluded it is in the best interest of all concerned, including the residents and the haulers, that we evaluate our options prior to initiating the 5-year period, with the understanding that the 5-year period will allow for continued analysis and corrections. Therefore, Mr. Chairman, I move that the staff develop potential options, including pros and cons of each option, conduct a public forum among staff, licensed haulers, and homeowners association representatives managing hauler contracts on behalf of their residents, with the goal of reaching agreement on the facts associated with the options, and develop a process for board consideration and ultimate implementation of each. I further move that we not hold a public hearing on this matter until the above tasks are completed and viable options are vetted with the board.
I'm happy to second that motion along with Supervisor Smith and a whole lot of others. Discussion on the motion, Supervisor Alcorn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. There's not a lot more local government than trash collection, although our role in Fairfax County for many of our residents is more of a regulatory one, not an operational one. And I know we've heard a lot of things on this issue from our residents and others. You know, I've gotten requests from the Reston Association for Greater Reston to be a sanitary district. You know, I had my town hall recently, and I had people outside of Hunter Mills showing up and talking about this issue. So been a lot of discussion out there. We are subject to that 5-year waiting period. That's in state law. And really the question has been, do we try to figure out the high-level approach before we start the 5-year waiting period, or do we do that during the 5-year waiting period? And I think what at least I've come to the conclusion is we need to figure more of that out before the 5-year waiting period starts, based on some of the discussion that's happened in the community. And I do just very briefly want to touch on a couple things, sort of reminding each other why we're looking at this. And, you know, it's not going to come as a surprise to us, but our system isn't perfect. We have areas where it could be better in terms of our trash, our recycling, our composting services. And just a couple of those examples. If you live in a single-family detached home, a traditional suburban neighborhood in Fairfax County, and you don't have a homeowners association contracting for you, then you're on your own. You know, to me, it's the Wild West out there for folks in that situation. And, you know, as a result of that, we have neighborhoods where we have 2 or sometimes 3 different haulers going through the neighborhoods collecting trash and recycling. So for this part, for these residents, what we basically have is a retail market for trash collection and recycling collection. And those customers are paying retail prices. And I realize that if you do live in an area where you have an association working on your behalf, you may be paying a wholesale type price instead of a retail price. But still, we have all those folks that are paying retail prices. And, you know, this really became some of the fault lines that I'll call it in our system really became apparent during the pandemic, because we had a situation and we were all getting calls in our offices where they weren't getting service and they had very little recourse because it's a retail market. And at the time, there really weren't a lot of good options. Now, services have improved. Absolutely. We've seen that. And, you know, the retail private hauler systems have improved their levels. But it was visible in terms of those fault lines in the system for all to see back then. So, and I think for me anyway, why I have supported looking at this and moving in some direction along these lines is we do need, and our residents need, a simpler and more efficient system. So, and I'll just remind the board too, we have environmental challenges. You know, we're trying to reduce waste. You know, we're trying to facilitate recycling in a time of changes in global recycling markets. And then a big one out there that we're just starting to figure out is composting. You know, how is that going to work? So we have some significant environmental issues that we're trying to work through as well. So we're at this decision point. Do we go forward without really having much of a plan before the 5-year waiting period starts, or do we start the 5-year period and then figure it out? I think at this point, I think hopefully we all agree that we need to do some more work and to get a better plan or get a system for a better plan for our residents. We need to work on that before we start the 5-year period. So, and I think this motion does that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Supervisor Alcorn, and thank you for coordinating this. It's the right motion. I think a lot of us are disappointed at this stage in a lot of things. I mean, one is there is this state law of a 5-year waiting period that confused people. Most people have no idea that we're talking about something that could happen 5 years or more from now. They think it's like next week. Recently, I had a group of people approached me at a chamber thing and asked me why the county wanted to collect everyone's trash because they heard about the county takeover. And I said, the county doesn't want to collect your trash, trust me. And there is no takeover. And so there's been all this terminology used by folks who, you know, have really forcefully entered the conversation. And I respect that they need to protect their own interests. But as a result of that, there's a lot of misinformation. And while I'm supporting this because, you know, people before you enter something want to know, well, what is it more detailed that we're really talking about here? I will say the risk for a future board 5 or more years from now is you may be rewriting the whole plan by then, because what we could pursue now, what we'd be talking about doing now, is 5 years away. And what we've seen is major changes in this industry over the last 5 years. We wouldn't put forward something today that would be identical to what we would have been talking about 5 years ago. And so the state mandated period becomes a challenge here, whether you put forward a very definitive plan now, recognizing that that's what the public is hearing and not knowing what could possibly happen 5 years from now, or whether you entertain that conversation through the course of the 5-year period. I actually think the latter was what the intention was with the General Assembly when that was established. But because of the amount of information that's out there, and I am disappointed in how much of it is not true, but that being said, that's the world that we live in, and we need to take the time to clarify some of these things with the public a little bit better. And so I support no public hearing at this point until we can come back with a more detailed plan that shares a lot of things you just shared, because I don't think a lot of people know that, and to take the time to do this right, but understanding that a decision about this is 5 years or more away. There'll be a different board sitting here, and there'll be a different public taking these services that may have a different opinion about what it is we're talking about now. And so I just want to be really transparent with people that is the situation that we're dealing with, and that is the reason why I'm supporting this motion. And I know we'll all work with staff as we move forward on getting our input into what are some conceivable plans that we're talking about. And I see a lot of hands. So remember what we're doing here is we're not holding a public hearing. We're still required to have a 5-year period. Every member of this board will have 5 years at least to opine on this issue. So take that into consideration before you speak. Supervisor Harity.
See, and I'll be, I'll try to be real quick. First, thanks Supervisor Alcorn for bringing this forward. You know, when we talk about recovery of trash services, it's our county services needed to recover too. So it was not just the private sector that needed to recover. I think what our residents really were worried about and our haulers were what was it really going to look like and the impact in this 5 years and then the impact after the 5 years, and we didn't really have a lot to tell them. So I'm happy we're taking the time to be transparent. As the only supervisor on the dais who voted against advertising this thing in the first place because it wasn't ready for prime time, I'm glad we're taking the time to go back and put meat around the bone so our residents understand what we're planning to do. And you were entirely right with I like the retail versus wholesale because the ones we're trying to fix are those, but and unfortunately, I've asked the question, and I'd love to, if we could find out what the answer is. I'm told we can't do it. How many of our residents are served by HOAs and how many are not? So we understand the impact of that problem. And I don't know how we get there, but hopefully we get there as a part of this process. But thank you again for bringing this, and I'll be supporting it.
Supervisor Walkinshaw, I saw first, so we'll go around.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to support the board matter. I want to start, first of all, just thank our staff, Matt Adams and others in solid waste. A lot of time and effort and work and engagement with the community has gone into getting us to this point, and if there needs to be more work and more engagement, I think that's great. A couple of things that I just want to point out based on what I've heard. I think it's important to remind ourselves of the history here. And it's not just that the quality of service from our private haulers declined during and post-COVID. And folks here on this board longer than me should recall that it's almost like, I don't know, what is a cicada cycle? How many years is that? It's shorter than 7?
7.
Oh, okay, much shorter than that.
Yeah.
It's almost every 5 years in this county. Yeah. And when I started this job and talked to my predecessor, Supervisor Cook, who went through 2017 and 2018, terrible service from the private haulers. Had nothing to do with COVID. There was no pandemic. The industry goes in cycles. There are cycles of consolidation, and our residents suffer. And it's happened every 5 years for decades. We happen to be right now on the upside of that cycle. I'm here to tell you we will be on the downside of that cycle again if we do not reform this system. So if we need to take a little bit more time to look at it, I think that's great. Supervisor Harity, I've been quiet on this. You pointed out you're the only supervisor who voted against advertising. You're also the only supervisor whose position has flip-flopped on this issue. Because we discussed this many times at environmental committee meetings. And you were one of the most vocal supporters. And I went back and watched the tape. You said, and this is exact quote, "We absolutely should do this with respect to residential." Now, I respect positions change, but I think you should be honest with folks that your position has changed on this issue. And I haven't heard you do that with the public or here at this dais. A lot of good stuff has been said about the opportunity we have to improve our processes. For me, and I've had plenty of meetings with haulers, good meetings, not so good meetings with haulers. I don't represent trash haulers. I want every business in the county to succeed and thrive. I represent 130,000 people in the Braddock District. My job is to get them the best service I can get them. And historically, on a roughly every 5-year cycle, we have not had that under the current system. So, I hope we will continue to press forward. I think it's prudent to get more information to address some of the information that's been put out there publicly, but we cannot allow for that down cycle of service for our residents to come back, and it is coming. It will come. Thank you.
And before I turn to the next one, I just want to add to that, what we're asking staff to do is, take this pause, but to develop a proposal. As I said earlier, 5 years is a long time from now. This is a proposal. We're asking them to come back with a proposal. If the public believes we're going to be able to answer every single question of exactly what is going to happen 5 years from now, we need to be realistic with them and stop that. Because, the rest of us voted to authorize a public hearing because this is a conversation we need to have. We can bury our head in the sand and walk away like there's no problems. But we know our residents know there's a lot of problems, as Supervisor Walkinshaw just mentioned. So the easy political thing to do is bury your head in the sand and walk away from it. The harder thing is to have this conversation with the community. That's why we authorized the public hearing, to have that conversation. Unfortunately, pieces of it have been hijacked into a different narrative, and our staff, despite all of their hard work and answering a lot of questions, has not been able to convince some people in the community that we are looking at every detail of this. But the frustration that they can't answer every question, we have to be real about. We're talking about something that could happen in 2031. So we need to be realistic at the same time we're causing this delay to have this conversation. Others who would like to be recognized, Supervisor Bierman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Supervisor Alcorn, for bringing this board matter. I wholeheartedly support it. I think that we need to take more time to be able to present residents who are looking at something that would be a disruption in the status quo. We need to be able to present them with more information about what that could look like and what the next steps would be. I think that we did not do a great job of coming up with multiple scenarios and being able to present that to residents. And if I had to offer one thing that I want to make sure happens when this proposal is brought back to us, it's an actual timeline and a work plan. So I held a town hall, and one of the questions that admittedly got my dander up was when somebody asked something along the lines of, so game out, if we take this vote and we start the 5-year clock, what does the next year look like? And the answer was not great. I mean, there wasn't much information about steps there. All that being said, and again, I think that we need to create a menu of options. No, we're not going to be able to answer every question, but we need to sort of have some scenarios and some possibilities. And yes, keeping in mind what Chairman McKay just said about how we'll have 5 years to talk about this, I do want to just point out a few things about this situation and why it's been difficult. Chairman McKay said that he thought the legislature thought about a 5-year period so you would have more time he changed it. He just said part of the reason his mic wasn't on, because I've had a hauler sit in my office and say, no, they did that so you will never be able to achieve this. And he goes, we did that. He said, we did that. He said, my parents helped write that bill so that if you ever tried to do this, we'd vote you all out. I don't really like that type of threat in my office, but it's kind of funny now. But look, that is absolutely true. That 5-year waiting period is an incumbent protection opportunity, and we shouldn't forget that. The second thing is, I do want to make sure that when we go through this process, we recognize that the fault lines in the process are probably much more, in truth, based on status quo and not status quo than ideological. If I went to the town of Herndon right now, where, by the way, the town of Herndon has town of Herndon trash pickup, and I walked around town and I said, we're doing away with town of Herndon trash pickup, everything's privatized, it's all going to be private haulers, I guarantee you that there would be some folks with Winsome Sears signs in their yard who would tell me, how could you do that? How could you do that? This is a core government function. Similarly, You can walk around McLean or Great Falls. Somebody's got an Abigail Spanberger sign in their yard, and they'll say, how could you do that? Why are you having the government take this over? So I think we should recognize that going into this and try to recognize that ultimately this is about, I believe, about two things for our residents. One is the most central thing. How do we make sure they're getting a better deal? Period. You know, James represents 130,000 in the Braddock District, 130,000 Drainsville, 130. Are they getting a better deal? And look, there is also a second component of this, which is we know that the way that we collect trash, the way that we process trash, the way that we deal with trash, the way that we recycle, does have broader environmental effects. And we want this county to be around for our kids, our grandkids, our great-grandkids, you name it. So we got to ask those two questions. Are we sure that our residents are getting a better deal? And are we getting ultimately a better deal for this county and the environment? Which, by the way, I've also had the exact same private haulers sit in my office and say, what you think you can do with this, we can actually do without it. So great. Let's have that conversation. Let's figure it out. So I support this motion. When it does come back, I hope that we have a menu of options. I hope we have a timeline. I hope we have a work plan. And I look forward to hearing from county staff. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A lot's been said. I don't know that anybody else needs to say anything, but let me check. Okay. The motion has been moved and seconded. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That motion carries. Supervisor Alcorn.
I'm almost going to say that is all, but I do want to just point out one thing. We're not talking about changing the town's trash collection. All right.
Yeah, that's right.
Because I have one of those towns too.
Yes, you got it.
Right. Okay.
I don't want to make news
It was
on
a
that one.
hypothetical.
It was a hypothetical.
Okay.
Hypothetical.
Hypothetical only.
So that's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Yeah, that's right.